Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Martin Luther King Jr. Distinguished Lecture. I'm Brooks Jackson, Vice President for Medical Affairs and Dean of the Roy J. and Lucille A. Carver College of Medicine. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Talmadge King as our distinguished speaker this afternoon, and especially during our UI Healthcare Human Rights Week, when we commemorate the life and legacy of another Dr. King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Before I introduce Dr. Talmadge King, I would like to take a moment to welcome members of the university administration and our friends and colleagues from across the campus, our University of Iowa Healthcare, faculty, staff, students, and volunteers, and all the members of the Iowa City and surrounding communities who are with us today. I am proud to say that recognition of the late Dr. King's birth date of January 15th has been a tradition at the University of Iowa since 1969, and the MLK national holiday has been observed on our campus since 1986. Beginning in 1995, an official university holiday was established to give members of the university community the opportunity to remember and reflect upon the values that Martin Luther King holiday represents. Today, it is a campus-wide celebration, bringing together faculty, staff, students, and the community through discussions, service activities, arts and music, food, and events such as today's lecture. The Reverend Dr. King's words and actions continue to inspire and leave a profound impact across our nation and around the world. As individuals and as members of this great public university and the broader Iowa City community, may we advance the Reverend Dr. King's legacy by putting into practice the values of fairness, equality, diversity, openness, and inclusion in our recruitment of students, staff, and faculty, in our collaborations with peers and partners, and in our daily interactions with patients, clients, colleagues, and each other. I would like to take a moment to recognize the UI Healthcare Human Rights Week Committee for their efforts in planning and promoting this week's events, led by the committee's chair, Dr. Kanya Ferguson. Would all the committee members please stand to be recognized? I would also like to take this opportunity to honor the 2020 recipient of UI Healthcare's Culturally Responsive Healthcare Award. This award is given each year to honor an individual or group for providing and promoting care that recognizes the social and cultural backgrounds of our patients and their families and emphasizes our commitment to inclusion, empathy, and understanding. This year's award goes to the LGBTQ Clinic Team, which was established in 2012 by Dr. Nicole Nicely in the Department of Internal Medicine and Dr. Katie Mborick in the Department of Family Medicine. The LGBTQ Clinic, which is located at the UI Healthcare facility at Iowa River Landing in Coralville, includes a team of physicians and advanced practice providers, as well as nurses, medical assistants, pharmacists, and social workers. Other specialists from across UI Healthcare in pediatric endocrinology, pediatric psychiatry, plastic and reconstructive surgery, and urology are also part of the LGBTQ clinic team. On the screen, you can see the names of many of the members of this clinic team. Together, they provide a welcoming and reassuring environment for patients to receive comprehensive care, from routine health screenings to hormone therapy to gender-affirming surgery. As we know, it can be challenging for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer or questioning patients, particularly those in predominantly rural areas of the state, to find safe, accessible care. Because UI Healthcare was the first in Iowa to offer comprehensive care to the LGBTQ community, the clinic has become a welcoming destination for trusted, high-quality primary and specialty care. Since its inception, the LGBTQ clinic has served more than 1,200 patients from across Iowa and neighboring states, with over 60% of its patients coming from outside Johnson County. It's worth noting that the establishment of the clinic led to other important changes to our medical center, including changes to our electronic medical record system to include preferred name, gender identity, and preferred pronoun, as well as patient self-identified sexual orientation. The team also fostered changes in the way we educate healthcare providers with the ultimate goal of creating an inclusive environment for all of our patients, and especially our trans and non-binary patients. And I am proud to note that the clinic team-based approach and its commitment to inclusiveness has earned it the distinction of LGBTQ Healthcare Equality Leader by the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Here to accept the award on behalf of the clinic team are staff nurses Bridget Hintermeister and Lexi Dodds. So please join me in congratulating the LGBTQ clinic team as the 2020 recipient of the Culturally Responsive Healthcare Award. And now to our distinguished speaker. Dr. Talmadge E. King, Jr. has served as Vice Chancellor for Medical Affairs and Dean of the School of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco since 2015. He began his career at UCSF in 1997 as Chief of Medical Services at San Francisco General Hospital. And from 2006 to 2015, he served as chair of the UCSF Department of Medicine, the largest department in the university's School of Medicine. During Dr. King's tenure as chair, the Department of Medicine was consistently the #1 recipient of research funding from the National Institutes of Health among all departments of internal medicine in the nation. And as a physician scientist, Dr. King's research has focused on inflammatory and immunologic lung injury. He is perhaps best known for his pioneering work in the management of interstitial pneumonias, a scarring process that often leads to death. His bibliography comprises more than 300 publications, and he has co-authored 11 books, including the acclaimed reference book Interstitial Lung Disease, now in its 5th edition. He co-edited Medical Management of Vulnerable and Underserved Patients, Principles, Practice, and Populations, the only reference currently available that focuses on the treatment of patients living with chronic diseases in poor and minority populations. A graduate of Gustavus Adolphus College and Harvard Medical School, Dr. King completed residency training at Emory University-affiliated hospitals in Atlanta and fellowship training in pulmonary medicine at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center in Denver. Dr. King is a member of the National Academy of Medicine, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Association of American Physicians, the American Clinical and Climatological Association, and the Fleischner Society. He has served on both the Advisory Council and the Board of Extramural Advisors of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the Lung Biology and Pathology Study sections of the National Institutes of Health, and the NIH's Advisory Board for Clinical Research. I would like to remind everyone that we will have a brief Q&A session following Dr. King's remarks, and we have handheld microphones available for asking questions as well. And so now it is my pleasure to welcome to the podium our speaker for the 2019 UI Healthcare Martin Luther King Jr. Distinguished Lecture. Please welcome Dr. King, Talmadge King Jr. with me. Thank you.
So thank you, Dean Jackson. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you coming out. It's an honor to be here. So I used to come to the university a lot in the 80s when I was actively doing research. I worked with the pulmonary group here. And we actually did some nice stuff. It was true, and it's still quote cited today. So it's good to be back. It doesn't look the same. Not at all. So things have really changed. As going on sort of all over the country, but it's really an honor to be here. So this is a half century after the death of an American hero, Martin Luther King Jr. So it's well that we consider his wise prophecy, that we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But the bending towards justice does not result from forces like gravity or by accident. The bending is the result of being pulled toward justice by both revolutionary and evolutionary forces, and it bends because of the work of people and communities. So today, we will talk about the forces in our country and our healthcare system that have worked to see justice as a guiding force in all of our important work. And I hope that at the end of my remarks, you will join me in advocating for physicians and other healthcare workers to take responsibility and a leading role in bending the moral universe toward justice. While I will frame my remarks with stories about the people and work at UCSF, our journey to achieve social justice in healthcare, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging in our workplace is something that it's a continuous journey. And I'm not here actually to preach, I'm here to teach and to learn. So just to tell you about our journey. So at UCSF, back in 1968, the Black Caucus formed at UCSF. This is the oldest culturally based affinity group in the UC system. Remember, the UC system's 10 universities. We have President Dr. Janet Napolitano, so each university is separate. UCSF is the only one that is a health science only. And we don't have a football team, we don't have a basketball team. We don't have undergraduates, we do science. It was built, this Black Caucus was built on a foundation of social justice advocacy. At that time, African American custodial employees at UCSF were known as the basement people. That's because regardless of which floor they worked on, they had to return to the basement for their breaks, to use the bathroom, or to have their meals. The elevators only went to the ground floor. The basement people went on strike during this time, demanding two things. First, a revolutionary change. They wanted to create better working conditions for themselves. Mike, there's back on. The second was an evolutionary change. They wanted more African American doctors at UCSF, and so they demanded more opportunities for blacks to enter into our medical school. Their bravery and their vision led to UCSF to reflect on the importance of diversity in healthcare and to commit to changing our admissions process, such that today, the working conditions of our employees have improved dramatically, and more than 35% of our entering class comes from groups that are underrepresented in medicine. As proud as we are of diversity, it took several decades and another group of courageous and visionary people to catalyze the next landmark step towards social justice at UCSF. So this marks the 5th anniversary of the UCSF student-organized White Coats for Black Lives. This, troubled by grand jury decisions to not indict police officers who were involved in the deaths of 2 unarmed African American men, was the result was a series of die-ins around the country, with medical students donning their white coats and lying down in peaceful protests to call for institutional change, especially in regard to health care and medical education. The students held a mirror up to us and said, "You have to do more than simply pronounce that you believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. You actually have to do the hard work to unravel the consequences of structural racism in our society and at our school." They asked us, what were we doing to make the Bay Area and beyond a place where all could thrive? And the answer was, not as much as we should or could be doing. So we were in the midst of preparing for our, which was to be held about a month after the die-in. And the university turned on a dime and said, we need to do something, and we need to do it now. So we turned instead of having a retreat on partnerships, we convened a retreat that focused on race and racism at UCSF. It was an intense day and a half where we heard story after story from students, faculty, staff of color about their journey to and through UCSF and how they had been impacted by structural and interpersonal racism. We heard of full professors who were being profiled while traveling to a visiting professorship at an Ivy League institution. We heard of students not eating for the final days of the quarter so that they could send part of their scholarship money home to help their family. We heard about residents, staff, faculty subjected to racist comments from their patients and, unfortunately, from their colleagues. So in the year that followed the die-in, the UCSF chapter of White Coats for Black Lives became the seed for a larger discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion on our campus and in the community UCSF impacts. And out of it, we established an initiative which we call Differences Matter. This was a decision on our part that the School of Medicine should no longer wait for someone else to bend the arc of, to bend the moral initiative towards justice, but we had to do something ourselves. We had to actually engineer that change. So this School of Medicine Differences Matter initiative was a multi-year, multifaceted initiative designed to make UCSF the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive academic medical system in the country. The initiative provides financial support for the time and effort of more than 20 faculty and staff to develop and implement initiatives that drive structural change in 6 critical areas. And I'd like to discuss those areas a little bit more in detail later. It also led the chancellor to proclaim that health equity was one of the key initiatives that the university should undertake. And he said, we live in a time of awe-inspiring advances in science, yet too few share in the benefits. That gap contributes to a divide in health outcomes, which we are furiously trying to close. So the chancellor then charged the provost, Dan Lorenstein, and the vice chancellor for diversity, Renee Navarro, to lead an initiative called the Future of UCSF Priority on developing and sustaining a culture of equity and inclusion. So the campus was taking on the issue of equity and inclusion, and I decided that the school should take on the issue of health and healthcare disparities. And so we started this out. So we started out by trying to get everybody more or less on the same page. So one thing we did was to try to focus on what is reality. And the reality is that in the US, health and healthcare disparities are a long-standing and persistent problem. It's interesting to go back to the Heckler report written in 1985, and this is one of the key statements in that report. Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and those of Asian Pacific Islander heritage have not benefited fully or equitably from the fruits of science or from those systems responsible for translating and using health science technology. So not much has changed. Racial minorities and the poor bear a disproportionate burden of morbidity and mortality in the US. And the question then was, why? And one of the things we wanted to point out to our faculty, staff, and students was, this was not an accident. We live, work, and play greatly. All of that has been shaped by our communities around us. And it's common to think first about individual behaviors, about genes, about healthcare access as the most important factors in good health. When in actuality, it's other things like housing or education or environmental exposures or public safety, employment or income that are really strong predictors of health and well-being. And so it was with this understanding that we started thinking about, well, what has led to a lot of these problems? Many, many things have led to this. But three examples are frequently cited. One is Social Security, the other the GI Bill, and the other is FHA redlining. These were huge factors leading to poverty and the wealth gap in the US. So first, Social Security. When Social Security came into law, it excluded domestic and agricultural workers, which at the time were disproportionately African Americans. It wasn't an accident. It was done on purpose. As a country, we intentionally made the decision that some people could spend their senior lives and die in poverty or rely on the support of their children and family. If you die in poverty, you have no intergenerational wealth to transfer to your children. And so over time, years and years and years, the median household wealth for the white population far exceeded that for Asian, Latinos, and African Americans. And this played a huge factor in that, because as people were living longer and aging, people from underrepresented minorities tended to not have the ability to generate wealth. The second was the GI Bill. The GI Bill was exacerbated in a way because when African Americans came back from the war, like my father shown here at age 95, my father was a proud American and a proud veteran of the Second World War. Actually, I called my sister, we buried him with that hat. And so he was absolutely a proud American, but he didn't have equal access to the benefits of the GI Bill. In fact, he used to talk about the struggles he had, because this is small town Georgia, and the banks just didn't loan to him. So he had to do it himself. So that although the GI Bill did not specifically advocate discrimination, it was interpreted differently for blacks than for whites. And it's been stated that the law was deliberately designed to accommodate Jim Crow, because the programs were directed by local white officials, and many veterans did not benefit from it. So it's been clearly documented that had a huge impact on minority communities. The third was redlining. And actually, I was startled when I learned that. I heard about redlining, but I didn't realize it was actually real. You go back and there are documents that show communities all over the country where a line was drawn in this map. This is Chicago, and if you know Chicago, this is the south side, and then this is all green here. That's the lake, right? So a line was drawn. Green is where these are supposed to be good, and red is bad. And so African Americans were predominantly prevented from purchasing homes that were in neighborhoods in the green, and were persuaded or pushed to purchase homes in neighborhoods that were in the red, and this then led to problems. So for example, two of our students last year, our first year students in our prime program, these are students interested in basically the urban underserved. They went back and looked into redlining and its impact in San Francisco. Remember, San Francisco is basically a big rectangle, and the areas in red here were the poor areas of town, and then in green, the wealthy areas of town. And then they matched that with current day rates of high preterm birth rates, and found that there was almost a direct overlap. And so this showed that even now, the impact of this redlining was still present. There was also an issue of the impact on education. So one of the challenges has been the structural discrimination that racism that has resulted in educational problems in our community. And it turns out many things impacted that. But one of them was, the key one was the property value was the basis under which funding was generated for schools. So if you're relegated to an area where the property values are very low, the income that can be now generated from those properties for the schools is actually very low. And that is partially why in San Francisco they made it that no matter what school you were in, a lottery picked where you went to school, because then that was an effort to try to level the fact that this redlining had occurred. When you look back even at national data, this redlining impacted teacher quality and stability. Gifted and talented students of color were not selected. In part, we believe because of unconscious bias that teachers brought to their work. And teachers statistically were less likely to suggest a male student of color for any kind of program. Students were often not given the ability to be tested and received accommodations when they had disabilities, especially if they were in low-income schools. And then legacy admissions, which is a part of structural racism at private schools, undergraduate, secondary schools, as well as private colleges. So that if your parents went to Harvard, which was predominantly white in their generation, it was a setup for inequality in admissions by virtue of the fact that they had legacy access to admissions. And then achievement tests like the SAT, the MCAT, the LSAT were used as aptitude tests rather than true achievement tests, is another example of how it contributed to this problem. So you look at the sum total of all of this, and what you find is that this is what happens in the pipeline. This is part of why the pipeline leaks. There are just many ways along the system where people are disadvantaged and they can't struggle on through to get advanced degrees and to move up the economic ladder. And we saw this the students saw this even in their analysis of San Francisco today. So they also looked at the educational disparities that play out in San Francisco. And again, they were surprised to see that most of the problems, most of the red is in the same areas that were redlined, 70 years ago. So year over year, the high-performing schools were in the green section and the low-performing schools were in the red. So this was a form of structural racism that we had to confront and sort of had to deal with, and we had to find different ways of trying to overcome it today. So that we talked a lot about this at UCSF, trying to get us all on the same page. And the other thing that we focused on was something that Dr. Martin Luther King said, and that all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhuman. And so we also learned that healthcare disparities were present throughout our community, and that unequal treatment, there was an IOM report on unequal treatment showing that racial and ethnic differences in the quality of healthcare, not due to access-related factors, still exist for many conditions, shown here: cancer screening, end-stage renal disease, HIV care, coronary artery disease. Those are all things that were in play. And so with this information, we fell back to this philosophical belief, and that knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. So then we started to set about doing. And the first thing we realized was that you can't do anything if you don't deal with the culture, because culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we started to deal with this by convening multiple meetings. We did a landscape assessment to identify existing areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and opportunities for intervention. We coordinated new working groups, and we dedicated a $10 million fund to building more programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our idea was we can't do anything till we work on our culture and try to get our culture to change. So we needed to change the conversation. And we understood that this would take a long time, that we had to deal with not only the overt things that we could easily see, but all the subtle things that go on. And we had to embed a new way of thinking and doing within our system in everything we do. Morning report, grand rounds, lectures, papers, talks. We had to actually attack many, many different things. In our executive committees, we actually had to have a framework in those committees where we used the right language, we talked about things in the right way, we tried to overcome our microaggressions, our implicit biases. So we started by trying to train people in implicit bias. So we required basically everybody to do implicit bias training. And with the idea that at first, we just wanted to immunize the herd. And if we could get the herd immunized, we could actually then feel that we would get herd immunity by people beginning to be open and frank about what was going on and facing things in a real way. And then we started to talk about what do these things mean. So one of my friends told me this, and it was very helpful into how I framed this whole issue about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So she said, diversity means everyone is invited to the dance. Equity meant everyone can afford the ticket. Some way, somehow, they can get there. Inclusion means that everyone is asked to dance. They can say no, but they're asked to dance. And then the key was belonging. Until we got to the point where everybody could dance like nobody's watching, the system didn't work. So this has been what we've been thinking about is you got to get to the dance, you got to have a way of paying the ticket, you got to be asked, and you can actually do the boogie and nobody cares, right? Because you're really a part. And so that is what we've been trying to build at UCSF. And we also believed in this statement, that all Americans should have the opportunity to make choices that allow them to live a long, healthy life, regardless of their income, education, or ethnic background. Now that statement is interesting because the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation spent millions of dollars to come up with a statement that they could say in any venue, and people would say, I agree. It's striking. So they had all kinds of other statements about, this is right, this is just, this is da da da. But it enforced everybody, people could push back and say, but if you ask anybody from the far right and anybody from the far left, do you agree with this statement? Almost uniformly, they said yes. So then fundamentally, then we actually agree, right? So how do we make this reality? And so we said, well, let's just start thinking about this and understanding equality, equity, and no barriers, right? And so we have focused primarily on equity because there will always be barriers of some sort, we think. But if we can focus people's attention on equity, that would go a long way. So that's how we sort of have started this journey. So that's the moral side of this sort of, right? You make people feel guilty, right? You try to make them actually understand what's going on. This is America. You can show them that it impacts money. The next thing we did was, is there a business imperative? Is it in your best interest financially to do this? The second thing we had to get our people to believe is that social justice in medicine is actually in our lane. There were a lot of people saying, why are you interested in this? And we said, because it's in our lane. This absolutely became true as we as an institution have gotten more and more involved in gun violence. There are people attacking us because our faculty are getting, and students and staff are getting directly involved in gun violence, showing it up publicly, showing pictures of people dying, showing pictures of people in the trauma center at San Francisco General, flailed open with gunshot wounds, because we feel people need to see, and it's in our lane. So societal inequities impact our patients, staff, faculty, and our learners, and so we say absolutely is in our lane. Also, we believe that medical schools are actually a public good. We're a state institution. Our goal is to pair well-educated, highly trained physicians who meet the high standards and clinical competence needed for the 21st century. And so we said our workforce must be prepared to address health disparities. And we now know that recruiting and educating this workforce, we needed it to be diverse, and we needed to ensure that when they entered the workforce, They understand the role that racism plays in health and healthcare disparities. So we changed our curriculum to start to deal with these issues as students entered our medical school. So why is it important, and why is it of interest, a business necessity? The first is that lots of studies have shown that diversity actually trumps ability. That the collective ability of a community or work site is equal to individual ability plus diversity. A diversity of informed views enables objections and alternatives to be explored more efficiently and solutions to emerge more readily and be adopted with greater confidence. And several studies have supported that. The presence of women and minority members on a leadership team enhances problem solving in the same way, since they add perspectives from different experiences. And people with different lifestyles and different backgrounds challenge each other more. As a consequence, diversity creates dissent. And you have to buy into the issue that dissent is important, because you need that to actually have deep inquiry and to make breakthroughs. You need people who don't agree with you to challenge you, so you begin to think outside the box. And you can only do that if you have a diversity of opinion and thought and background to actually show you that there's a different way of looking at it. So we've tried to make this part of UCSF. We also know that companies that have more diverse workforces perform better financially. It turns out the more you have gender diversity, those companies with greater gender diversity have 15% more likely to outperform other similar companies. And this has been done several times now, been studied several times. And if you have ethnic diversity, those 35% more likely to outperform similar companies. So we had to show them the data to say, look, this is about the money. This is about the success. This is how this works. And so by doing this, this should help. And even in science, we've shown, these are two papers from Nature, that science benefits from diversity by improving participation of URM groups is not only fair, it produces better research. For example, papers written by diverse groups receive more citations and are published in journals with higher impact factors. That was something we did not know, but somebody went through and carefully looked at it. So it matters, even in our research environment. We also said diversity equals quality health care. So minority physicians are more likely to practice in underserved areas and to practice primary care. Race concordance between physicians and patients results in longer visits and increased patient satisfaction. And language concordance improves adherence to treatments in many groups. So there are many, many factors. And our medical students tell us uniformly that a diverse student body improves the experience of medical school and enhances classroom discussions. So with that as background, more and more of our leaders started to say, okay, this is hard, but we need to work on it. So here are the things we do, and I'd just like to share some examples of the outcome that we've had at UCSF. So we formed 6 basic focus groups. Each focus group is headed by a faculty and a staff. So I decided that I didn't want people to just do it as a volunteer. We found the money and we said, we're going to pay you for some part of your time to take on these tasks. And these groups were led by someone we hired to take charge of the Differences Matter initiative. Right now, that person is Beth Harleman. So she oversees all of this, and this is their job to do it. It's not totally voluntary. We want them to have the time to pay close attention to it. So the 6 areas were diversity and leadership, recruitment, retention, and climate, pipeline and outreach, clinical health equity, research action group for equity, and the learning environment. Each of these had a goal and had specific tasks that we wanted them to do, and the tasks have been evolving over time, so it's been a changing. And these are the 20 or so diversity leaders that we hired to work on this project, so these people lead these efforts, and in my view, they've been doing a great job. So diversity and leadership. So as dean, one of the first things I did was form a Chairs and Deans Council on Diversity, charged with developing and implementing and monitoring the culture of diversity we're trying to build. And it turns out having this council was good, but we needed a way to achieve accountability. So what we then did was every department has the report on a yearly basis, what they're doing in diversity. I want everybody to be doing something. And they generate the report, it goes to a committee of faculty and staff. They actually review each department in detail, and then they send me a report about each department. If the department is not doing anything, they meet with the department as a group and have a discussion about why aren't you doing anything, where are things going. And there's a plethora of things that can be being done in any given department, because everybody's not in exactly the same place. The idea is we've got to keep incrementally moving forward. And then I have a meeting with all the chairs and directors one-on-one each year, and we go over where things are. And we had several departments who did nothing for a couple of years. So we had to have a come to church meeting to sort of say we're going to deal with that. And I said, people said, well, I'm a scientist, I don't have time for this. I'm fine with that. Let me know when you're going to step down, and we will work on finding the next person to do this. But this is part of what we want you to do. So our chairs have actually started to embrace it. Every department has done something to move the needle in the right direction. Then the next group was recruitment, retention, and climate. So we created a GME holistic review and best practices for diversity handbook that all the residency directors and student educators looked at. We formed a second look program for residents who are applying to our residencies. And lo and behold, we've had an 11% increase in UIM residents coming to UCSF, despite our high cost of living. And so something works if you look at it differently. And we're still working on this. Well, it's a real challenge, but we are really proud of the progress that we're making there. We did, probably one of the most important things we did was we required all of our leaders, and we started with those who had their hands on educating students or residents. So we wanted to deal with them first because they are so important to the training program. So we required them to go to a day-long diversity, equity, inclusion champion training because we were training them to be trainers so that they can train other people in their department. So far we've trained 1,400 faculty and staff on microaggressions, unconscious bias, and privilege. And it's, I think it's gone well. In the first 300 to 500, there was something striking about the people who attended. So I asked people to volunteer. There was something striking about it. And the striking thing was, it was 80% women, 80+% women. UCSF faculty and staff is about 50-50. So I'm like, what's going on here? The men were not showing up. And the men chairs were not showing up in groves. So we had another church meeting, and we discussed, you have to do this. I mean, people came up with all kinds of cockamamie excuses. And in one group, they were nameless, but there are people who say, well, I'm too busy, I gotta be in this room on this day, and I can't change my schedule. I'm like, not this day, because we're closing it. And we decided that because they were worried about their income, okay, well, we'll pay you. I think that shocked everybody, right? It's like, we'll pay you to go do this, but we want you to be there. So we've now gotten it up to about 1,400. We have 13,000 employees, long way to go, but this has sort of been helpful in sort of changing it. The other thing that we did that I think was really helpful is we found the money to form what we call the John A. Watson Scholars Program, which is a diversity fund to support the recruitment and retention of faculty who share the university's commitment to diversity and caring for underserved and vulnerable populations. And so it's like a CARE award, right? But it's a 3-year grant, $75,000. And I tell them, you can do anything you want with this money. You can't go to Las Vegas, but you can do anything you want with this money to help your career. And I am not expecting you to do diversity work. I'm expecting you to do the science or clinical work or whatever it is that's going to help your career, but I'm not going to let you in unless you actually value diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's what you have to value, but what you have to do is science. I want you to come out the other side prepared to do what you need to do. And so we've picked people, basic scientists, community workers, clinicians, who we think are interesting, and they're all from, almost all from underrepresented groups. So that has been, we now have 42 scholars. We had one graduating class so far, maybe two. And it has been, the payoff has been unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. We have tripled, quadrupled the positive outcome from these people and their success. So it's been very much worth it. The next thing we did that I think really changed, and this was we changed it so that any committee in the school had to have 50% representation from women or URM. So half the search committee had to be women or URM. And at first, we got a lot of pushback. So who did we get the pushback from? Who? No, the women. So it was fascinating. So why? There you go. Women have to do everything. So then right? So then I met with the women, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, 50%, And then what I realized, underlying that was another issue, and that was, well, the search committee should only be formed by senior women. Well, if you look at a situation that's been biased toward women for 1,000 years, there are fewer senior women than there are junior women. And then I said, well, wait a minute. Everybody on my faculty could be president of the United States, and you tell me they can't be on a search committee? So I don't care if they're assistant professor or instructor or whatever. They're qualified to do it. So we said everybody can be on a search committee if you're on the faculty. So then now that increases the number. And then I said, I promise you, I'm going to look, and I have a staff member, Deb Ryder. She looks and she says, when was this person on a committee? And if they were on a committee, we don't put them on another committee. Because your mind, you find the people you know and you find your people who do good. So I said, look, I have these brilliant people here, so let's just get the list. So I went through the list of everybody who was trained in leadership. So these people go to leadership classes and they go to seminars. Well, they got the training, so we have a list. We sit with the list, and we just spread it around everybody. And I swear the committees have gotten better. And one thing that I just learned last week that shocked me was we looked at all the endowed chairs that we've given out, or reassigned or given out in the last 2 years since this started. And it used to be 60, 70, 80% went to men. And this past year, it was 50-50. 50-50. So there was a 160% increase in the number of women who were appointed to endowed chairs. And I think it's a direct result of the fact that women were on the committee. And then I jumped for joy the other day. There was a committee, all women. So I'm sure the men are going to complain about the lack of diversity. But I think that it was things like that I think have helped to try to change the climate there and get it away from being an old boys club. We also worked on a lot of other issues that were important. Childbearing and child-rearing leave was important. We improved that. And then the other thing we did is faculty salary equity review. And it turned out that was very, very difficult to do. And we've been doing it for 5 years, and every year we find a problem. It's incredible to me. But 2 years ago, last year wasn't as bad, we've gotten back. 2 years ago, we had 2 people, man, woman, hired same day. It's true, same day they got the letter. In the same department, doing the same work with different salaries. How could that possibly happen? I mean, it's unbelievable. So we broke it apart, and there were all these little cockamamie things. And then one of the things that we tried to eliminate is, you look in there, when I was chair of medicine, a faculty member would come to me and say, because it's all reported, our salaries are reported. It turns out they always are wrong, but they're directionally right? They're always wrong, but they're directionally right? So people coming off, when I was chair, and they'd say, so-and-so makes $50,000 more than me. And so I started looking, and I'm like, huh? so the first thing I did was I looked at all the letters. So as chair, you won the game if you could hire a faculty member for the lowest salary possible. No. Isn't that true? Right? You won the game, so your whole game was you hired them and you say, well, what do you want? And if you don't have a parent who's a faculty member who knows better, or you don't have a group around you who knows better, you think it's been an honor for them to hire you onto the faculty and you take this out. And so I won the game the more faculty I hired who were underpaid. And then it turns out the men had a real good game. And the one that stopped me in my tracks, 2 cardiologists hired in the same department, same division, same time, and one of them made like $40,000 more than the other. And I'm like, what's going on here? And then I read the letter. So the woman had a straightforward job getting a salary. The guy had a straightforward job getting a salary. Here's the trick. He got $10,000 to be director of the cath lab from midnight to 2 a.m. on Saturday. Right? He was director of Saturday night cath lab. He got $15,000 to be director of Echo on Wednesday. And he got $10,000. There were all these things that were just tagged on to make it, and the whole goal was just to pay him more. Right? So they gave him these costs. So I immediately we're stopping that. The letters are going to all be the same. And it's been impossible to enforce. I mean, it's impossible. All the time, there are all these little tricks going on. And the guys will push it. The second thing I realized was the women, we gave bonuses, incentive plan. And it turns out you could decide to take it as salary or to put it in an academic enrichment fund. What did the guys do? Take it as salary. What did the women do? Striking. It was striking. So the women would come and they'd complain to me, I make less than this person, but you were paid the same. You decided to take your money and put it in the bank. You had that mothering spirit, right? You wanted to save it for a rainy day. And the guys are like, I'll spend it, I'll figure it out when the rain starts, right? And so we said, we had to fix that. It's like, you can't complain about your salary if we paid you and you decided to do that. So there are all these structural things that were going on that we had to try to fix. And every year we find problems. So we're doing much better. It's a moving target. I should stop. The other thing, the learning environment, we redesigned graduation competencies. We want people to understand about race, racism, and healthcare. So we've integrated social justice throughout the curriculum. We revamped AOA and honors because we found there was a systematic way of keeping underrepresented minorities out of AOA. It was systematic. And we said, in fact, we're threatening to get rid of AOA. And that happened because a student walked to me at the end of the year, and he was graduating. He said, well, he loved it, UCSF, but he still is upset that he wasn't AOA. And I said, well, I'm sorry you didn't make it. He said, I was told the first week I came that you're not going to be AOA. I don't care how good you are. I'm like, well, how could somebody tell you? Another student told me that. I said, how could somebody tell you that? He said, the guy said to him, you're not going to be, the only way you're going to be AOA is if you can do something about that skin color. And I'm like, what the hell? So then that's when we started looking to see what was going on in AOA. So one of the things we've done is eliminated honor grades in the course lectures. They systematically disadvantage UIR residents, systematically. And so we said we have to do something. We've written about this, by the way, so you can read about our experience with that. And then we've done a lot of other things, anti-racism primer and things like that. The research advocacy group, we have had very, very few underrepresented minority faculty in our basic science departments. Very few. I can count them on one finger, well, maybe one hand. Right? And so we said, we have to do something about that. So we provided money to hire URM faculty, and this year we've hired 2 new URM faculty in our basic science departments. We have doubled the number of diversity supplements so that more and more underrepresented minority trainees are funded. We work with high school students, we work with college students. We're doing more as outreach. We've tried to deal with clinical trials so that more people of color are parts of clinical trials. Very difficult area to overcome. But we've tried to make all of the clinical trials literature in multiple languages and at a reading level that people can understand. And we've put on symposiums related to diversity and equity. And it started off with a small number of poster sessions, and now the place is packed. A lot of people are working on it. We worked on clinical equity, so we have a health equity council at the health system. We developed an equity toolkit to deal with oversight and patient experience in the various departments. And we launched an effort to collect race and ethnicity data on our patients so we can subdivide our patient population and understand better what's happening with them. For example, we found that we did really well in hypertension management until you looked at African American men. And we looked at African American men and said, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then we found out we had to change our approach to that subgroup, and now it's getting better. And then we do a lot of things on pipeline. We work with we now work with high schools. Actually, we decided we needed to go to elementary schools, but we have a lot of pathway programs, workshops that we work with teachers in the community. We've had a long-standing relationship with the science teachers in the community. And so we believe that if we're going to change the needle in the long run, this evolutionary change, we got to start in the high schools and locally. For medical students, we introduced a coaching program so that one-on-one, we pay a coach to work with a medical school student from day one to help them navigate the system. And it's probably the thing our medical students like the most is working with a coach who's not there to judge them. The coach is there to coach them and to help them and to tell them things that they won't know and to reassure them when they're having trouble that things will be okay, that this is not unexpected. They work on their clinical skills and the students love it. And the people who benefit the most are the coaches. It's fantastic to watch what the coaches say. And the other thing we realized was we had this other problem, and that is first generation students to medical school. No matter your race, ethnicity, or background, first generation students suffered at UCSF. So we have a first generation support service because over 30% of our students are the first in their generation to college. And so we now have a support group that looks at them, and they look a lot like URM faculty in the problems that they face. And so that has been actually very helpful. So these are big topics and hard. And we just can't be afraid. We just have to jump in there and just do it. There's no silver bullet. There are a lot of just little things that we have to work on day in and day out to empower, and we need to empower and appoint leaders who will join us in this effort. And I don't care how good a scientist or a physician you are, if you're not interested in helping solve this problem, then you should find somewhere else to work. Because I think that this is really critical. Fortunately, most people are. Most people, this is something that they understand and are beginning to value. But I believe that working together and being committed to this, we can create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. And I had the opportunity to spend time this morning with the diversity, equity, inclusion experts here and with the students here, and you guys are on the path too. And if there's anything we can do together, we should try and work together to make that happen. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
This is a very impressive and comprehensive program, really. You are to be congratulated. It really, you've done a lot of great work, no doubt about it. We're, I think, a little behind you in what you've been doing, but we are making progress as well. But boy, this is really some really great ideas that we could adopt here too as well. So please, questions for Dr. King?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lisa Covington. I'm a PhD candidate in sociology of education. And I'm just thinking about Dorothy Roberts' work in particular, her book called Killing the Black Body, and how medical schools and often different systems, like you talked about, really systematically create situations for people of color in particular to be marginalized within these systems. And so I'm just thinking about how do we, and she does some tweeting about this recently about how some medical schools are still teaching that Black people, for example, Black people don't feel the same, right? They take a higher tolerance of pain. And so how are those things being addressed at
Yeah,
your
so
institution?
this question relates to, and I'm chuckling because I just remember a specific incident. But people get up and they start the Grand Rounds presentation, 20-year-old, 55-year-old Black male. Then you hear the thing, and why'd you say Black male? And then you read it, there's a subtext in there that it had nothing to do with the person's illness, right? But it was sending a message, right? And so our students have been empowered to stop the faculty in the moment and deal with it. So we've been teaching them this is with respect, right? But do you understand what you just said? And why did you say it? And we actually now, when you give a lecture, we have a service where if you're giving a lecture, we'll sanitize it for you. Basically, we'll review the lecture and say, look at this. Did you think about the implications of what this means? And most of the time, the answer is no. I just had no idea that may have that reaction. So to whatever group you're talking about. So we've gone through most of the lectures now, because they're all videotaped. And our students are very proud of themselves. They go through and they are trying to fix it like this. So, and the whole idea is, can we change the conversation? Can we change the language? And point out to people what the implications of what you're about to say or have said are for the people you're working with and what it might be. So that's going to take a decade or two, right? But it's beginning to work, and we're starting with the medical students, right? So it turns out if we start there, then they never get trained in this other way, hopefully. But I rapidly forward and tell you, there's a hidden curriculum at every school, at our school too, and I find there are these people that are just intransigent. I mean, they won't change, and so we have to work with them. But we think that what you say and how you say it and how you approach people matters, and we want people to understand the implications for people. But people say, patients say terrible things, but we're trying to work on it. I think that hopefully that answers your question. But this one of the things, we have a group of
Dr. King, it was a wonderful presentation. A number of us have trainees that have applied for jobs in the UC system, and they've been asked to write a mandatory diversity statement. And I'm trying to figure out whether that's a sort of reactionary kind of requirement that, doesn't actually allow any diversity of thought. Is it sort of papering over institutions that are not really doing anything about diverse issues, or does it have some sort of a function if it's a mandatory statement about diversity?
Yeah, so it's, there's a little bit of controversy about whether we should ask that. Here's my position. There are a lot of people who never thought about it. And it turns out this is the only time we get them to think about it. And so at UCSF, it turns out, well, you can say something on it that will keep your application from going forward. I haven't seen that happen. But we basically want people to think about it. And if you go to come to UCSF, we don't want you to come if you're not going to be comfortable. And so we want you to have thought about it before you come. And so that's why it's there. It gets read every single time. But it's an experiment. We're trying to figure out if that's going to help us get people to just think about it. And then having thought about it, then hopefully people will start to do something about it. But, so that's basic. And I mean, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but I am.
Dr. King, this is Marie Hancock here. Very nice to meet you, and I've really enjoyed your presentation. My question kind of joined the gentleman before me, and also the topic that you've spoken of in terms of sanitization. We would sanitize your presentation for you. Not only being a minority, but having also heard the other side of the argument, how do you address or reconcile within yourself the idea that maybe sanitizing someone's conversation might not cure what is going on internally, or what may have created that belief to begin with? And how do we address that? Because often what I hear is people feel we talk too much about diversity, we're pushing it on them, instead of allowing them to come to the table and perhaps with time cure what may have driven them to be at that place of intolerance, or of just not knowing the unknown, or not wanting to embrace what's unknown to them.
Yeah, that's I think a number of people feel that way. A number of people, like, you're talking about their academic freedom, whatever, but usually the issues that we raise don't actually have anything to do with what they're teaching, right? I mean, they're talking about the Krebs cycle, and they use a case example. It doesn't make any sense. You don't even need that in the presentation. So, or you say something that's just, so mostly what we're looking for is what's in here that actually has nothing to do with the lesson you're trying to teach. And so that's what we try to emphasize. And some people don't like it. I mean, and some people get really angry. I've had one faculty member just really angry that we called into question what was being said. But it's like, I hear you, I understand your anger, I understand you're upset. Back away for a second, calm down for a second. Here's what the audience is hearing, in particular this audience is hearing. Do you actually mean them to hear that? And usually when people back away from it, then they say, well, I don't really need to say this, it's not helping the message I'm trying to impart, and so they back away from it. I actually think it's just an excuse. I mean, and it's a part of white privilege that we just shouldn't allow. I mean, you just gotta stop it. And it's gonna take decades, but you just gotta stop it. And stop it now. And it's gonna take us a long time for people to understand that. And, you know, I understand people get really hurt. I mean, we've had people, you know, my cousin-in-law does equity training. And she has all these examples. She was just talking about diversity, like the lecture I just gave. Some guy got up and started doing yoga in the middle of the floor. Because he said he was so stressed out, he would stay, but he needed to do yoga. So what was that? What do you think that was? Well, no, you know what it did was, they were talking about these issues, and all the focus went from these issues to this guy on the floor doing yoga. It was just a distraction. Just a distraction. And her message to him was, get up, go back to your seat, and let's continue the conversation. Because today, we're not going to pay attention to you. We're going to pay attention to these other issues that need to be dealt with. And so we're there. And look, guys, we don't fix this, the country is going to go down in tubes. I mean, everybody thinks we're going to magically recover from this. There are 1 billion guns in this freaking country. And if we don't, there will be an uprising where all of us will suffer. This is a country of a melting pot. And we have got to figure it out. And if we don't figure it out, we are all gone. The country is gone. So let's figure it out. problem I have is most of the people in this room are part of the choir. It's the only reason you came. The people who are not in the choir, they're outside this room. So I know that you're part of the solution. I'm talking about the people who don't come, afraid to come, won't come, can't listen. They're just believing that it's going to continue to be the way it is. I'm scared to death. I look at my two granddaughters and I just hug them. I want to hold them close because I am so afraid that this country is going down the tubes. Because the country will be, there will be no majority in this country in 50 years. Right? It'll be all of us. We have to figure it out. I know we can figure it out. Right? We just have to be committed to it. We have to be willing to work together. We have to value diversity and not be angry or not push back against it, but value it and use it to our advantage. The truth is, it is part of what has made America great. Right? Our willingness to take the poor and the unhealthy and the weak and from other places, bring them here, and the oppressed, bring them here, let them thrive, and we as a country will thrive. We stop doing that, we kill ourselves. So I think we just have to do it. And I thank you all for coming, and I know we're out of time, but thank you.
Thank you.